The U.S. government's National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, reports that the Twin Towers were brought down by a weakening of the steel from fires caused by the airplane impacts and followed by a simple gravitational collapse. But this New York Fire Department map shows the locations around the towers at ground zero where human remains were found. Yellow circles are body parts from civilians. Red triangles are from firefighters, and blue stars are fragments of police officers. Is the great distance at which many of the body parts were found logically explainable with a simple gravitational collapse? In 2006, 5 years after 9/11, over 700 bone fragments were recovered by workers preparing to tear down the damaged Deutsche Bank building on the other side of Liberty Street, almost 2 football fields away. USA Today wrote, quote, "The bone fragments are tiny, the size of a pinky nail." 9/11 debunkers have suggested that the bone fragments could have reached the Deutsche Bank rooftop after the North Tower impact of Flight 11, but the view of Deutsche Bank was blocked by the South Tower. Furthermore, the body parts as seen in this map belong not only to civilians, but to firefighters who were clearly not present in the North Tower at the time of initial impact. According to the chief medical examiner, 2,749 victims died in the Twin Towers, but fewer than 300 whole bodies were recovered. Nearly 20,000 pieces of bodies were found in the ruins, more than 6,000 small enough to fit in 5-inch test tubes. 200 different pieces were matched to a single person. 1,630 people were eventually identified, 800 of which by DNA alone. This means that for 800 victims, there were no body parts large enough to be recognizable. The remaining 1,119 victims were never identified. This means that for more than 40% of the victims, not even a fragment large enough to recover DNA was found. If a simple gravitational collapse is what occurred, what happened to 41% of the victims? And how could the people that were found be scattered so far away and each body so completely dispersed? On the evening of February 23, 1933, a fire broke out in Germany in a very prominent building, the Reichstag, Germany's parliament building. The historic building was burned to the ground. Blaming the destruction on a communist uprising, the Nazis under Hitler were able to throw millions of Germans into a convulsion of fear at the threat of communist terrorism. Soon after the Reichstag burned down, and in the name of keeping the German people safe, the Reichstag fire decree was issued, which nullified many civil liberties of the German people. 68 years later, not one but 3 prominent buildings would be burned to the ground. Blaming the destruction on Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, the American government under Bush was able to throw millions of Americans into a convulsion of fear at the threat of terrorism from the axis of evil nations. Soon after the trade towers in Building 7 were brought down, and in the name of keeping the American people safe, the U.S. Patriot Act was issued, which nullified many civil liberties of the American people. They say that those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Immediately after the 9/11 attack, this entire area became a crime scene. A paramount rule in crime scene investigations is don't tamper with or remove potential evidence from the scene. Doing so is a criminal offense. Since the collapse of steel-framed skyscrapers due to fires is completely unprecedented, the steel should have been subjected to detailed analysis in order to prevent further collapses in the future. So what did the authorities do with this key evidence of a supposed engineering failure? Over the objections of victims' families and others seeking a genuine investigation, they immediately began removing and recycling it. Michael Bloomberg is quoted as saying, "If you want to take a look at the construction methods and the design, that's in this day and age what computers do. Just looking at a piece of metal generally doesn't tell you anything." The pace of the steel's removal was very rapid. So much so that by September 29th, 130,000 tons of debris, most of it reportedly steel, had been removed. Though the authorities overseeing the aftermath of the 9/11 tragedy didn't feel it was important enough to keep the materials in the crime scene on site, they deemed it a high priority to monitor where that metal went and what its location was at all times after it left the scene. So much so that they installed GPS systems on each truck exiting the site to the tune of $1,000 each. SecuritySolutions.com said, quote, 99% of the drivers were extremely driven to do their jobs, but there were big concerns because the loads consisted of highly sensitive material. One driver, for example, took an extended lunch break of an hour and a half. There was nothing criminal about that, but he was dismissed, end quote. This is Fresh Kills Landfill in Staten Island, New York. Opened in 1947, it was temporarily used as a sorting ground for roughly 1/3 of the rubble, or about 2 million tons of material from Ground Zero. More than 1,600 personal effects were retrieved at this location. Thousands of detectives and forensics evidence specialists worked for over 1.7 million man-hours at Fresh Kills Landfill to try to recover remnants of the people killed in the attacks. For years, Tanya Head, who rose to mini-star status as a well-known 9/11 survivor, faked being in the South Tower during the attacks and served as president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network before people finally discovered that she lied about her entire story. Turns out she wasn't even in the United States during the attacks. In the PC game Deus Ex, the Twin Towers are missing from the New York skyline. While the leaders of America following 9/11 said they couldn't envision terrorists bringing down government buildings, the game explains that the missing towers are the result of a terrorist attack. The game was released 15 months before 9/11. Every aircraft has a specific maximum operating velocity known as the VMO. This is the maximum airspeed at which an aircraft is certified to operate and should never be exceeded, especially at low altitudes. And never means never for a reason. Should the VMO be exceeded, a phenomenon called flutter can occur, which can make the plane extremely difficult to control and can quickly cause irreversible structural damage. The VMO for a Boeing 767, which is what American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175 were, is 414 miles per hour. For the Boeing 757, which is what American Airlines Flight 77 and United Airlines Flight 93 were, it's 402 miles per hour. Yet on 9/11, government-funded NIST and the 9/11 Commission reported that all the hijacked planes were operating at speeds close to or beyond 500 miles per hour near sea level without suffering any visible structural damage, and with absolute control by the novice pilots all the way to their targets. American Airlines Flight 11 is said to have been going 494 miles per hour when it hit the North Tower. United Airlines Flight 175 is reported to have struck the South Tower at 586 miles per hour. American Airlines Flight 77 supposedly struck the Pentagon at 530 miles per hour after perfectly executing a 270-degree, 350 mile per hour corkscrew turn. United Airlines Flight 93, which went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, is said to have plowed into the ground at 580 miles per hour. A powerful explosion devastated the lobby of the North Tower and blew out most, if not all, of the huge glass windows an hour after the initial impact and before the collapse of the South Tower. Firefighter John Schroeder was climbing the stairs of the North Tower when he heard the huge explosion below.
We're heading up to the 24th floor of the stairwell, and all of a sudden our building got rocked. We got bounced around in the stairwell like pinballs, man. And we just said, you know what? Time to go. We came down, it looked like a bomb went off in the lobby. Everything was exploded, everything was gone. We're like, what is going on here? For every window in the lobby to be exploded. I mean, them windows were like as thick as forget it. They were 2-3-inch glasses, you know, come on. They exploded out of the lobby, you know, it wasn't from the jet fuel. No way.
A full 8 weeks after 9/11, firefighters and others reported that as they continued search and rescue operations, their boots were melting from the intense heat of the fires below. As trucks were loaded with glowing red-hot steel, construction workers could feel the burning heat from 20 feet away as the scrap trucks rolled by. In an article entitled "A Dangerous Worksite," the U.S. Department of Labor wrote, quote, "Underground fires burned at temperatures up to 2,000 degrees," end quote. Mayor Rudy Giuliani's testimony also echoed the existence of 2,000-degree heat at Ground Zero. If it's true that jet fuel burns at 800 to 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and jet fuel and office furnishings were the only source of heat, as NIST reported, what was the energy source that caused 2,000-degree fires which burned for months after the tragedy? As required by law since 1967, there are 2 black boxes on each commercial jetliner which records and safeguards vital information for the purpose of facilitating the investigation of aviation accidents and incidents. Located in the rear of the aircraft and so allowing for the best possible chance of impact survival, these bright orange colored black boxes are more specifically known as the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. Each unit, made of the most indestructible materials known to man, is designed to withstand powerful acceleration and deceleration forces up to 3,400 Gs, prolonged exposure to 2,000-degree temperatures, and even extended immersion in some of the deepest parts of the ocean. On 9/11, Flights 11 and 175, which allegedly struck the North and South Towers respectively, had 2 recorders each for a total of 4 virtually indestructible black boxes. In spite of the fact that the search at Ground Zero was so meticulously combed through that they were able to recover dozens of watches, personal documents, buckets of coins, and even banknotes, the official story claims that 4 bright orange, blast-resistant, virtually indestructible voice and data recorders were nowhere to be found. Going hand in hand with the last fact, at 8:46 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, it's alleged that American Airlines Flight 11, traveling from Boston to Los Angeles, struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Through that destructive force, no titanium, virtually indestructible flight data recorders were found. But the flimsy passport of Satam El-Sakami made its way through the intense flames onto a New York street below, and eventually into the hands of investigators in virtually pristine condition. And it's not that fragile items can't be found intact through seemingly impossible odds. It's the fact that items that were designed to withstand unthinkable destruction didn't survive, while other infinitely more fragile items, like the passport that miraculously and conveniently identified an alleged hijacker, did. When the World Trade Center construction project was nearing completion, both buildings were fitted with a hat truss, a huge steel structure that connected and bound the outer and inner columns from above. The hat trusses covered an area of 1 acre in size and sat on the very top of each tower. There was nothing above them which could have crushed them except the antenna of the North Tower. If a simple gravitational collapse had occurred, one would expect 2 1-acre hat trusses to be sitting on top of the rubble, maybe deformed but still recognizable. From the thousands of pictures taken at Ground Zero, including the aerial shots, no recognizable section of either hat truss was found, even though the much more fragile antenna of the North Tower was recovered. Number 1 is coming up, and if you like this content, hit that subscribe button for more great videos. And don't worry, subscribing is free and painless. Enormous amounts of water were hosed on Ground Zero day and night. According to the U.S. Department of Energy's Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, after 9/11, firefighters sprayed millions of gallons of water in the fires and also applied high-tech fire retardants. Specifically, 4 million gallons of water were dropped on Ground Zero within the first 10 days after September 11th. Tom Manley of the Uniformed Firefighters Association, the largest fire department union, said, quote, "You couldn't even begin to imagine how much water was pumped in there. It was like you were creating a giant lake, and yet, in spite of this, the 2,000-degree fires continued to burn for months." If you enjoyed this video and you think others could benefit by viewing it, click that like button and share it on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you want to see more videos like this, as well as a mix of other content, give that subscribe button a click. For more information and additional content, let's connect on Facebook at facebook.com/highimpactflix and reach out to me on Twitter at highimpactflix. Until next time, remember, it's easier to deceive the masses than to convince them that they've been deceived.